move on to other political issues. And in his budget reply speech on Thursday, Peter Dutton revealed plans to slash permanent migration by 25% in response to the nation's housing crisis if the coalition wins the next election. Then today, Nationals leader David Littleproud announced that the coalition is hoping to redirect skilled migrants to regional areas by reviving the Australian agricultural visa. And the idea here obviously is to free up housing in capital cities and encourage development in the regions. Sam, I think this is going to shape up as potentially the issue when it comes to the next election. First from the housing front, but immigration will then obviously buy into that. And I think watching Peter Dutton on Thursday night, that was an election pitch. That was very much an election pitch. And I think he's setting up on something that the coalition can easily win against. Well, I'm not saying they can easily win the election, but it is an easy win for them to say, look, migration is far too high. Polling consistently shows that the majority of Australians believe that. It's just a no-brainer policy.
Yeah, I think you've got to be careful about relying on the easy wins. I think this is a complicated issue at the best of times. It is a complicated issue at the best of times. And the more that you say, well, there's just this big lever over there, and if you just pull back on that lever, then it's super easy and we'll fix everything. I think Australians are kind of smart enough to go, oh, but hold on, what about the aged care worker that we need? What about the skill shortage of the doctors that we need? What about the skill shortage of the nurses that we need? They're three of the biggest groups that are coming in on as migrants right now, right? And so, look, I think it's a fine debating point. You can come on shows like this and have your audience go, oh, yeah, that's right. And then the rebuttal occurs and it just puts a little bit of doubt in people's mind. And, right now, the status quo is for the government to be returned, right? The status quo will continue. That means the government gets returned. So Peter Dutton needs to put forward a case of change. And a case of change is not going to be, we're going to pull back the migration switch by 25% and suddenly your kid's going to be able to afford a house. People know that's crap.
I don't think that's what the underlying
but that's the
feeling
influence. That's what he's saying.
They might, your kids actually might be able to get a rental when they're looking for one, or families can actually get a rental when they're looking for one. And I think to what David Littleproud was saying about the ag visa bringing it back. When I was out in Moree, can I tell you, every single harvest we have people that we employed on the ag visa. It was the only way we could get staff to do it. And so it was the dumbest thing to get rid of it in the first place. But the other thing that we can do, we talk about international students coming in. But at the moment, they all come in and want to go to UNSW, Sydney University, University of Melbourne. They're all going into the major cities, whereas there's lots of regional universities that these kids could be going to, which would bring in students that are doing nursing, that are doing some of these skill shortages that we have in rural and regional areas. The Labor government changed the definition of what is rural and regional without going into the complexity of it for how GPs can use their Medicare numbers and where they need to be located. And so what we saw, as soon as they did that, was a whole mass move of GPs that were in rural areas back into the region, into the cities, because they were allowed to and still have their provider numbers. So there's things that you can do that are targeted. No one's saying stopping skilled migrants coming in, but it's making sure that we're actually bringing in what we need, who we need, and getting them into the locations we need them to be.
But isn't that the whole point, though? Hasn't David Littleproud actually belled the cat on what Peter Dutton said, which is that actually, hashtag it's complicated. You can't just say we're going to put a cap on migrants or we're just going to slash it by 25%.
We had a half an hour budget in reply speech. We didn't have a 3 hour conversation on immigration.
But we know, firstly, the reason there is a housing shortage is because migration just stopped, and suddenly builders stopped building houses because they knew that no one was going to come and there was not going to be anything. And also a whole bunch of builders collapsed because the prices they were quoting suddenly shot up in the wake of COVID and shortage supplies. Probably the ultimate catch-22 is what happens when you have a shortage of people to build the houses and you need to bring in the people to the country to build the houses.
Which is sort of where we've been.
But almost the biggest problem is, yes, there's shortages of the people to do the labour, but the bigger problem is the shortage of the land where to put them and the structure.
There's no shortage of land in Australia.
But it's not being released by state governments, and the infrastructure isn't being put in place around them.
But also, what Littleproud is actually saying is we need migrants. We just need them in the bush. So the question obsession is
but
not just to cut
this
the
obsession with everyone having to go to the big cities, right? Everyone comes into Australia and they go to Melbourne or Sydney, and Melbourne and Sydney are absolutely heaving.
That's right, but they go to where the communities already
exist,
where they know people, and so the next question is, how do you force people to stay in the same plot? Are we going to have razor wire fences? Are we going to have, paper checks between rural and? But it's deadly serious. Bob Carr said this when he was talking about restricting migration 20 years ago. He said we can't turn New South Wales into a police state where we have people checking your papers at some arbitrary border between country and
international. Your student visa can be tied to a regional. Your university visa, the visa can be tied to a regional university. If you're coming in as a GP, that you've got to provide a number, it's tied to a rural area, and you actually make them rural areas. There are ways for this to be done. Unfortunately, Labor took away that when it came to the GPs, and a whole heap of them just moved straight back to the cities. There's nothing around the university.
They do that because because GPs were thinking, I'm going to get a whiz-bang job as a doctor, play golf on Wednesdays and all the rest. Then suddenly the government says, no, you've got to do 4 years in a regional area, and people think, I'm going to become a lawyer instead. And so again, I'm not saying you're wrong about any of these things, and there are solutions to them, but it is all very, very complicated. And part of the reason, the greatest irony of that there is a housing shortage is because developers didn't foresee any demand and thought, right, we're just going to stop building it because no one's coming in.
Yeah, and then we had such increased demand because we opened the floodgates again. I think the point is you need smart migration, not mass migration, which is sort of where we've found ourselves at the moment.